You have arrived at the K.O.E. Nation. The question is, you, from your Catholic perspective, do any Baptists go to heaven?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Okay.
No question about it.
Because, yeah, I was raised in a pre-Vatican II family. They were they had been raised like, no, only Catholics go. Oh my God, you have to be Catholic to go to heaven. And then when Vatican II hit, which, in my personal opinion, I don't know what I think in the end, Vatican II did more harm than it did good, honestly. Getting rid of the Latin Mass was pretty bad. Having the priest face the congregation was fine. That was seen as like a victory lap for Protestants. Like, the priest has to face the congregation now. We started that.
Sure,
But to me personally, the biggest thing that was the biggest disservice of Vatican II was reducing the standing of nuns to that of any other practicing Catholic. Like that would it just took 1,000 years of sisterly sacrifice and threw it out the window. And so that to me, those were the big, if you will, sins of Vatican II that made it very hard to there was a big exodus from the church after Vatican II, from what I could see.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were movements in both directions. I mean, there were things that needed to be corrected that Vatican II corrected. I take your point about nuns. Like, I'll have to look a little bit more into that. Absolutely, the church I
think there's a whole movie called Novitiate that covers the whole thing. Like, there were cloistered nuns, and the day they got the letter that said you are now on standing of any others practicing Catholic. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to say. Like, it's definitely, you would enjoy the movie.
It seems like that might be a missed opportunity, right? Because the church does have an issue with gender and the way that and the way that people perceive priests versus nuns, and anything you could do to elevate the role of a nun, it seems to me would help with that perception a lot. I should think.
And yeah, they really knocked him down more than a peg or two in that. But I remember
look into that. I'm not aware.
I was a wee little tot when it happened. I didn't even know it was, but at my church when I was growing up, they had it was packed that day, and I didn't know what was going on. And we did our regular mass.
Right.
And then they brought out this old timer. They wheeled him out, and it looked like he took every bit of muscle strength he had left in his legs. And he stood up, and he was facing away from us. And I was explained to me, this guy's going to do the Latin Mass for us after regular Mass. It was kind of like a treat. You know what I mean? Because he was one of the last guys who was he had used to do it back in the day.
Right.
And so I got to see, I'm like maybe 7 or 8. I didn't know what I was seeing, but it was one of those oh yeah. I do remember when I was a kid, there was this old timer that's with his back to us. He was saying a bunch of things I didn't get, and everyone was on the edge of their seat. And whenever I made any noise, parents shut up. It was one of those be quiet, kid. And so that was a moment that I'll never quite forget, just because everyone was when everybody in the room is very reverent to something, and you're like, I don't get what's going on, but I think I'm going to shut up. Whoa. And so that I did get to see, which is kind of interesting. And
but this was a time during which the church was being challenged by the West, by the secular West, specifically over its over modernism, right? The church was rejecting modernity. And Vatican II, ultimately, by the way, this brings us back to why I like Vatican II, is that Vatican II acknowledges something that the church had been resisting ever since the Enlightenment, and that was this concept of a freedom of conscience. That no matter what religion you're a part of or not a part of, you have the ultimate freedom in your soul to decide your own fate. And if you want to be Catholic, you can be Catholic. But if you want to be something else, you can be something else. And you have that fundamental right prior to any religious identity. And the Catholic Church officially did not believe that for a long time. Popes were coming out with statement after statement about how, no, you have an obligation to to follow God. And if you don't, then you're a heretic. And the church has a moral obligation to do everything it can to save your soul. But
Whether you
modernity
like it or
said,
not.
whether you like it or not. And what modernity says is that no, like consent precedes that. You need the consent of the person because they have the right to a freedom of conscience. And Vatican II finally admits that there is a freedom of conscience that precedes all of that. So you can't be, you can't be that Native American that was like chained to the church by the ankle until you converted or until the priest was like convinced that your soul was saved, because their justification being now you get to go to heaven instead of hell, and I've just saved your soul. Your personal freedom is a small price to pay for that, is what they would have said. And according to Vatican II, you cannot do that. Like, that is unconscionable. So ultimately, even though I take your point about certain liturgical changes that were made in Vatican II that I'd rather not be changed, because I too love the Latin Mass. I too think that there are certain like adornments of the church that were maybe aesthetically more appealing to me than what the church does today, like in as it conducts Mass. But that stuff is nowhere nearly as important as the theology and the moral philosophy of the church. And I think Vatican II like took us in a better direction with regards to that.
I don't deny that the Vatican II did some things that were necessary reforms within their church, but like I said, the things that they threw out a lot of the baby with the bathwater on that. And I don't think they've ever really recovered since they got rid of the Latin Mass, because once you're listening to a priest go in Latin versus in him, with him, is the mystery of the, like, it just doesn't, like, no one talks like that.
There's a beauty to the Latin Mass that cannot be denied. Yeah.
For sure. And so that really, and then they kind of they got very ecumenical, before Vatican II, all Protestants hellbound heretics.
Right.
After Vatican II, wayward brothers and sisters. Like, whoa! You want to talk about just a complete 360? And it made a lot of people's heads spin. Like, that was because like my mom actually went to church with a veil in her head until sometime in grade school. Like, she like that they were.
Yeah, people forget about that. Like, I've had so many conversations about the hijab and how terrible, Islam was because of the hijab, and like, that was Christianity before like 5 minutes ago. Come on.
My daughter actually has a couple of very good friends in her school that are Muslim, and some do, some don't. It depends more on the family and how they
see. Again, this is another thing that a right to conscience solves. Really, all we really should have to say about this is that if you want to wear one, but you shouldn't be forced to.
Yeah, and like what I always said is like, well, kiddo, if anybody's giving any of your friends a hard time, just bring it like, your own grandmother wore a veil in her head in church until at some point in grade school when she didn't have to. Okay. And for the Catholics, there was no choice in the matter. You wore it. There was no there was certain things that were because I remember seeing old pictures of my grandma. I was like, why is she wearing that thing? Was that like the fashion back then? Like, no. She had to wear that going to church.
Yeah.
Yep. And I was like, interesting.